The scream tore through the afternoon air just as the horizon turned the color of rust and blood. And Quinn Prescott knew without looking up from the fence post. He was mending that something had gone terribly wrong at the Henderson place, half a mile down the road. It was August of 1882 in Nevada, Missouri, a town small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business. And Quinn had heard through the general store gossip that Rebecca Brennan, the young widow who had moved into the Henderson farmhouse back in March, was expecting a baby sometime in early September. The scream came again, higher pitched this time, carried on wind that tasted like copper and dirt. Quinn dropped his hammer and started running before his mind had fully caught up with his legs, his boots kicking up dust as he vaulted the split-rail fence and cut across the dried summer grass toward the two-story farmhouse that sat alone against the prairie sky. He had seen Rebecca Brennan exactly 4 times since she had arrived in Nevada with nothing but a worn carpet bag and a wedding ring she still wore despite the fact that her husband had been dead nearly 6 months. She was 22 years old, the same age as Quinn himself, with dark auburn hair she kept pinned up and eyes the color of storm clouds before the rain came. Each time he had seen her, she had been polite but distant, the kind of woman who smiled with her mouth but kept her grief locked tight behind her teeth. Quinn had wanted to speak to her properly, to offer some kind of friendship or help, but his own shyness and her obvious desire for solitude had kept them as strangers who only nodded when they passed each other on the road to town. Now he burst through her front gate as the wind picked up with a vengeance, swirling dust devils across the yard. The sky had darkened impossibly fast, turning from blue to brown to an ominous greenish-gray that spoke of the kind of dust storm that could strip paint from wood and bury a man standing upright. Quinn took the porch steps 2 at a time and pounded on the door. "Mrs. Brennan. Rebecca." His voice was swallowed by the rising wind. Another cry answered him from inside, wordless and full of pain. Quinn did not hesitate. He turned the handle and found it unlocked, shouldering his way into the dim interior of the house, just as the full force of the storm hit with a sound like 1,000 angry hornets. The door slammed shut behind him, and suddenly the world outside disappeared into a wall of churning dust that blocked out the sun and turned 3 o'clock in the afternoon into twilight. "Upstairs," came a gasping voice, and Quinn followed the sound, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. He found her in the bedroom at the top of the narrow staircase, doubled over beside the bed with one hand pressed to the small of her back, and the other clutching the bedpost so hard her knuckles had gone white. Her dress was soaked with sweat and something else, and when she looked up at him, her face was pale beneath the freckles that dusted her cheeks. "My water broke," she said, and her voice shook but did not break entirely. "The baby is coming, 3 weeks early. I did not expect anyone. I was going to try to get to town. But then the storm came and I cannot even stand properly, and oh God, here comes another one." The contraction seized her, bending her nearly double, and Quinn crossed the room in 3 strides to catch her before she fell. She was small in his arms, barely coming up to his shoulder, but she gripped his shirt with surprising strength as the wave of pain worked through her. He could feel her trembling, feel the rapid thunder of her heartbeat, and something fierce and protective rose up in his chest. "I have helped deliver calves and foals," he said, which was true, though he knew full well that a woman giving birth was not the same as livestock. "I am not going to leave you alone in this." Rebecca made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. "I do not suppose I have much choice. The midwife is in town, 6 miles away, and this storm looks like it means to stay a while." She was right about that. Through the window Quinn could see nothing but brown chaos, the dust so thick it was like looking through muddy water. The house groaned and creaked around them as the wind battered at the walls. They were completely cut off from the rest of the world, and this baby was coming whether they were ready or not. "We need light," Quinn said, making his voice steady even though his heart was hammering. "And water and clean linens. Tell me where things are and I will fetch them." Rebecca managed to nod, lifting one shaking hand to point. "Lanterns in the kitchen cupboard, matches on the shelf. There is a pump in the yard, but I have a pitcher of water in the washstand there. Clean sheets in the trunk at the foot of the bed." Quinn settled her carefully onto the edge of the bed and went to work. The dust was already seeping in through every crack and crevice, a fine brown powder that coated every surface and turned the air hazy. He found the pitcher and poured water into the wash basin, then pulled clean white sheets from the trunk, their cotton fabric soft from many washings. The lanterns took him longer to locate, and by the time he had 2 of them lit and trimmed, Rebecca was bent over again with another contraction, her breath coming in harsh pants. "How far apart are they?" he asked, setting the lanterns on the bedside table and the dresser, filling the room with warm, golden light that pushed back the storm-darkened gloom. "Close," she gasped. "Maybe 5 minutes, maybe less. This is happening fast, Quinn. I am frightened." It was the first time she had used his name, and something about hearing it from her lips steadied him. He pulled off his hat and tossed it onto a chair, then rolled up his sleeves. "You are going to be fine. The baby is going to be fine. I am right here and I am not going anywhere." The hours that followed blurred together into a strange dreamlike sequence of moments stitched together by lantern light and the constant roar of the wind. Quinn helped Rebecca out of her wet dress and into a nightgown, averting his eyes as much as he could while still helping her move. He piled pillows behind her back and brought her sips of water when she could take them. Between contractions, she told him things in a breathless rush, as if she needed to fill the silence before the pain came back to claim her. She told him about her husband Thomas, who had been a clerk in a bank in St. Louis before he took sick with pneumonia and died in February, leaving her with nothing but debts and the news that she was pregnant. She told him about selling everything they owned to pay what Thomas owed, and how she had come to Nevada because her mother's cousin had owned this farmhouse and left it to her when he passed with no children of his own. She told him she had been lonely, so lonely, but determined to make a life for herself and her baby, to prove she could survive on her own. "You do not have to be on your own," Quinn found himself saying, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth as another contraction built. "There are people in this town who would help you. I would help you." "Why?" Rebecca's gray eyes fixed on his face, searching. "You do not even know me." "I would like to," Quinn said simply, and then the contraction hit and there was no more room for words, only action. The storm outside intensified, shaking the house on its foundations. Dust seeped in through every gap, despite Quinn's efforts to stuff rags in the cracks around the windows. It coated their skin, gritted between their teeth, turned the lantern light hazy and dreamlike. But inside that small bedroom, with the golden light flickering and the wind howling, something profound was happening. With each contraction that racked Rebecca's body, with each gasping breath and bitten-off cry, the careful walls she had built around herself began to crumble. "I cannot do this," she sobbed during a particularly brutal contraction, her head thrown back against the pillows. "It hurts too much. I cannot. "You can," Quinn said fiercely, gripping her hand as she squeezed his fingers hard enough to bruise. "You are the strongest person I have ever met, Rebecca Brennan. You picked yourself up after losing everything and came out here alone to build a new life. You can do this. I know you can." She looked at him through tears, her face flushed and her hair sticking to her forehead in damp strands, and something passed between them that had no name but felt like recognition, like two lost souls finding each other in the darkness. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Do not leave me alone." "I am right here," Quinn promised. "I am not going anywhere." The labor went on as the storm raged. Quinn lost all track of time, measuring the passing hours only by the progression of contractions and the slowly lowering position of the baby. He had helped birth enough animals to have some idea of what was supposed to happen, and he was profoundly grateful that despite being early, this baby seemed to be coming the right way, head first and steady. But it was still terrifying in a way he had never experienced, this witnessing of life entering the world through such a raw and primal process. Rebecca was magnificent. Even in the midst of pain that made her scream and sob, she kept fighting, kept pushing when he told her to push, kept breathing when he reminded her to breathe. The nightgown was soaked through with sweat, and the sheets beneath her were a mess, but her eyes stayed focused and determined. She was doing this, bringing her baby into the world in the middle of a dust storm with only a cowboy she barely knew to help her, and she was not giving up. "I can see the head," Quinn said, his voice cracking with emotion he did not try to hide. He had positioned the lanterns to give him the best light possible, and now he could see the dark cap of hair crowning between Rebecca's legs. "You are almost there, Rebecca. Just a little more." "I cannot," she wept, but even as she said it she was bearing down again, her whole body straining with effort. "You can. You are. Come on now, one more big push." Rebecca screamed, a sound that tore from the depths of her soul, and suddenly the baby's head was out, then the shoulders, then with a rush the whole tiny body slid into Quinn's waiting hands. For one horrible moment the baby was still and silent, and Quinn's heart stopped in his chest. Then he remembered what he had seen his father do years ago when a foal was born not breathing, and he turned the infant over and rubbed its back vigorously with the clean cloth he had ready. The baby gasped, sputtered, and then let out a thin, wailing cry that was the most beautiful sound Quinn had ever heard. Relief flooded through him so powerfully his hands shook as he wrapped the baby in the clean linen and brought it up to Rebecca's chest. "It is a boy," he said, his voice rough. "You have a son, Rebecca." She took the baby in trembling arms, and the look on her face in that moment was something Quinn knew he would remember for the rest of his life. Pure love, pure wonder, pure exhaustion and relief and joy all mixed together. The baby was small but seemed healthy, crying lustily and waving tiny fists in the lantern light. His skin was pink and his eyes, when they opened, were the deep blue of all newborns. "Hello, little one," Rebecca whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, my sweet boy. I am your mother. I am here. You are safe." Quinn helped her deliver the afterbirth, cleaned up as best he could with the limited supplies available, and got fresh linens under Rebecca and the baby. The storm was still raging outside, showing no signs of letting up, but inside the small bedroom a sense of peace had descended. The hard part was over. Mother and baby were both alive and seemed to be doing well despite the circumstances. Rebecca nursed the baby with Quinn's awkward but earnest help, and then fell into an exhausted doze with the infant tucked securely in her arms. Quinn sat in the chair beside the bed, watching them both in the flickering lantern light. The baby was tiny, impossibly tiny, with a scrunched-up red face and a cap of dark hair. He made small snuffling sounds as he slept, his little chest rising and falling rapidly. Quinn felt something shift in his chest, something profound and irrevocable. In the space of a few hours, everything had changed. This woman who had been a stranger, this baby who had not even existed in the world this morning, had become important to him in a way he could not quite name but felt down to his bones. He wanted to protect them, to care for them, to be part of whatever came next. The storm blew itself out sometime before dawn. Quinn had dozed fitfully in the chair, waking every time the baby stirred or Rebecca shifted in her sleep. When the first gray light of morning began to filter through the dust-coated windows, the wind had finally died to nothing and the air was still and quiet. Quinn stood stiffly, his back protesting, and went to look outside. The world was buried under a thick layer of fine brown dust. It covered everything like a blanket, drifted against the sides of buildings, filled in every footprint and wagon rut. But the sky above was clearing to pale blue, and birds were beginning to sing again. They had survived the night. Behind him, Rebecca stirred and woke. Quinn turned to find her looking at him, the baby still asleep in the crook of her arm. In the morning light filtering through the dirty windows, she looked exhausted and disheveled and absolutely beautiful. "Good morning," she said softly, and there was something in her voice that had not been there before, a warmth, an openness, an invitation. "Good morning," Quinn replied, coming back to sit on the edge of the bed. "How are you feeling? Sore? Tired? Happy?" Rebecca looked down at her son, her expression tender. "I cannot believe he is really here. I cannot believe we actually did that." "You did it," Quinn corrected gently. "I just helped." "You did more than help." Rebecca reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm and sure around his. "You stayed when you could have left. You helped me bring my son into the world. Quinn, I do not even know how to begin to thank you." Quinn looked at their joined hands, then up at her face. "You do not need to thank me. I would not have been anywhere else." "Why?" she asked again, echoing her question from the night before. "You barely know me." "Maybe I would like to change that," Quinn said, his heart pounding, "if you would let me." Rebecca's eyes searched his face for a long moment, and then she smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her whole face. "I would like that very much." The baby woke then, letting out a squawk of hunger, and the moment shifted into something more practical. Quinn went downstairs to see what he could find for breakfast, discovering that, while the storm had left dust everywhere, it had not broken any windows or caused major damage. He pumped fresh water from the kitchen pump, grateful it still worked, and found bread and preserves in the pantry that he brought up to Rebecca along with a cup of lukewarm tea. She ate ravenously, nursing the baby and telling Quinn between bites that she wanted to name him James, after her father who had died when she was young. Quinn thought it was a good, strong name and said so. They talked quietly as the morning brightened, about small things and large things, finding an easy rhythm of conversation that surprised them both with its naturalness. By mid-morning, Quinn knew he needed to get word to town about what had happened, both so the doctor could come check on Rebecca and the baby, and so people would stop worrying about them both. He was reluctant to leave, but Rebecca assured him she felt well enough to be alone for the few hours it would take him to ride to Nevada and back. "I will be fine," she said, looking up at him with those storm-gray eyes. "Thanks to you." Quinn rode into town on his horse Scout, who had weathered the storm in Quinn's barn and seemed none the worse for wear. The streets of Nevada were busy with people sweeping dust and assessing damage from the storm. When Quinn stopped at Doc Morrison's office and told him what had happened, the elderly doctor grabbed his bag immediately and promised to head out to the Henderson place within the hour. "That girl must have been terrified," Doc Morrison said, shaking his head. "Mighty lucky you happened to be nearby, son. Mighty lucky indeed." Quinn also stopped at the general store, where Mrs. Henderson and her daughter Sarah were cleaning dust off the merchandise. When he told them the news, both women exclaimed with delight and concern. "That poor dear, all alone out there," Mrs. Henderson said, already pulling together a basket of supplies. Sarah put together some food for her. Fresh bread, that chicken stew from yesterday, some of those apples that came in last week. Mr. Prescott, you tell Rebecca that we will be out to see her tomorrow when she has had a day to rest. A new baby. How wonderful! By the time Quinn rode back out to the farmhouse, his saddlebags were stuffed with donations from various townspeople who had heard the news. Doc Morrison passed him on the road, his buggy rattling along, and Quinn followed him back to Rebecca's house. The doctor's examination was thorough but quick, and he pronounced both mother and baby to be in excellent health, all things considered. The boy is small but strong, he said, wrapping the infant back up in his blanket. You did good work here, Quinn. Not many men could have kept their heads in a situation like that. After Doc Morrison left, Quinn helped Rebecca down to the kitchen so she could sit in a real chair while he cleaned up the bedroom properly, changing all the linens and opening the windows to air out the room. Then he swept and mopped the floors throughout the house, getting rid of as much dust as he could. Rebecca watched him work with a soft expression on her face, the baby sleeping in her arms. You do not have to do all this, she said at one point. I know, Quinn replied, dumping dirty water out the back door. But I want to. He stayed through the afternoon, splitting firewood for her stove and fixing a loose shutter on the front window. He knew he should go home, knew he had his own chores waiting, but he found himself reluctant to leave. And Rebecca did not ask him to go. Instead, when the work was done, she invited him to stay for supper, and he found himself sitting at her kitchen table eating stew and fresh bread while she told him more about her life in St. Louis, about Thomas and their brief marriage, about the dreams she had for her future here in Nevada. I want to keep this farm going, she said, her eyes bright with determination. I know I am just one woman with a new baby, but I am not afraid of hard work. My cousin grew corn and kept chickens. I can do that. I can make a life here. You should not have to do it alone, Quinn said, and when she looked at him questioningly, he pushed forward, his heart in his throat. Let me help you, Rebecca. Let me be part of this. I know we just met. I know this is all very sudden, but I cannot shake the feeling that I was meant to be here yesterday, that I was meant to help you bring James into the world, that this is the start of something important. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, looking at him across the table. Then she said softly, I felt it too. Last night when you stayed with me even though you could have left, when you held my hand and told me I was strong. I felt something shift, Quinn, like a door opening. I'm not sure what it means yet, but I would like to find out. So would I, Quinn said, and the smile that broke across his face was wide and genuine. They agreed that Quinn would come by the next day to help with the heavier farm work, and that he would continue to do so regularly for as long as Rebecca needed him. It was a practical arrangement on the surface, but they both knew it was more than that. It was a beginning. True to his word, Quinn returned the next morning and the morning after that. He worked on repairing the fence around Rebecca's chicken coop. He helped her plant a late vegetable garden. He fixed the roof where some shingles had come loose in the storm. And between the work, he spent time with Rebecca and baby James, learning the rhythms of their days, becoming part of their small household. Rebecca, for her part, found herself looking forward to Quinn's arrival each morning with an anticipation that went beyond simple gratitude for his help. She liked watching him work, liked the way he moved with quiet competence, and the way he always seemed to know what needed doing without being told. She liked the sound of his laugh when James did something amusing, and the gentleness with which he held the baby when she needed her hands free to cook or clean. Mrs. Henderson and Sarah came to visit as promised, bringing more food and supplies and exclaiming over baby James. Other women from town followed over the next few days, and Rebecca found herself welcomed into a community she had been too grief-stricken and proud to reach out to before. But it was Quinn's presence that meant the most to her. Quinn, who was there every day without fail, whose quiet strength and genuine kindness were slowly but surely winning her guarded heart. 3 weeks after the dust storm, on a Sunday afternoon when the late August heat had gentled into something almost bearable, Quinn and Rebecca sat together on the front porch while James napped in his cradle nearby. They had fallen into a comfortable silence, watching the sun sink lower in the sky when Rebecca suddenly spoke. "I am falling in love with you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did not mean to. I did not think I could, not so soon after Thomas, but I cannot deny it any more, Quinn. These past weeks with you have been the happiest I have felt in longer than I can remember." Quinn turned to look at her, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she must be able to hear it. "Rebecca," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I have been in love with you since the moment I helped bring your son into the world. Maybe even before that, if I am being honest. I have never felt this way about anyone. You are brave and strong and beautiful, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you do not have to face anything alone ever again." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Are you asking me to marry you, Quinn Prescott?" "I suppose I am," Quinn said, a grin spreading across his face. "Though I am doing a terrible job of it sitting here on your porch without even a ring to offer you." "I do not need a ring," Rebecca said, reaching for his hand. "I just need you. Yes, Quinn. Yes, I will marry you." Quinn pulled her into his arms and kissed her then, a kiss that was tender and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling through tears. "I want to adopt James," Quinn said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I want to be his father in every way that matters. I know he had a father, and I will make sure he knows about Thomas and honors his memory. But I want to raise him as my son, Rebecca, if you will let me." "Oh, Quinn," Rebecca whispered, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Yes, yes, of course. He needs a father, and I cannot think of anyone I would rather have fill that role than you." They were married 6 weeks later, on a bright October afternoon with half the town in attendance. Rebecca wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Henderson and Sarah had helped her sew, and Quinn wore his best suit with a string tie. James, now 8 weeks old and thriving, was held by Sarah during the ceremony. But Quinn took him in his arms immediately afterward, making it clear to everyone watching that this was his son now, in all the ways that mattered. The town threw them a party at the church hall, with food and music and dancing that went on until well after dark. Quinn and Rebecca barely left each other's side all evening, their hands constantly finding each other, their eyes meeting across rooms full of people with looks that spoke of deep and abiding love. They spent their wedding night in the farmhouse that was now officially their home, with James sleeping peacefully in the cradle that Quinn had moved into the corner of their bedroom. Quinn had been afraid it might be awkward, this first night as man and wife, given everything that Rebecca had been through. But Rebecca came to him with open arms and an open heart, and their lovemaking was tender and sweet, and everything a wedding night should be. "I love you," Rebecca whispered in the darkness afterward, her head on Quinn's chest. "I never thought I would feel this way again after Thomas died. I never thought I would want to. But you have given me back the ability to hope, Quinn, to dream, to believe in happy endings." "This is just our beginning," Quinn murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. "We have a whole lifetime ahead of us, Rebecca, and I intend to spend every day of it making you as happy as you make me." The years that followed were good ones, full of hard work and simple joys. Quinn proved to be a natural farmer, and together he and Rebecca built up the small homestead into a thriving operation. They expanded the chicken coop, planted larger fields of corn and wheat, added a few pigs and a milk cow. The work was endless, but they did it together, side by side, and that made all the difference. James grew into a bright and active little boy, with his mother's auburn hair and his adopted father's easy smile. Quinn taught him to ride almost as soon as he could walk, perching him on the saddle in front of him and taking him on gentle rides around the property. Rebecca would watch them go, her heart full, thinking about how lucky she was that the dust storm had brought Quinn to her door on that terrifying day when James was born. When James was 2 years old, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, without the grief and loneliness that had shadowed her first one. She had Quinn beside her every step of the way, rubbing her feet when they swelled and bringing her crackers when morning sickness struck. The baby came on a warm spring evening in 1885, and this time it was Doc Morrison who delivered the child, a healthy baby girl they named Lucy after Quinn's mother. James was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feedings. Quinn taught him to be gentle, and Rebecca's heart melted watching her son carefully stroke his sister's soft cheek and sing her the lullabies Rebecca had sung to him as an infant. 2 years after Lucy came another son, whom they named Matthew. And 3 years after that, twin girls they named Emma and Catherine. The farmhouse that had once seemed too big and empty for Rebecca alone was now bursting with noise and life and love. Some nights, when all 5 children were finally asleep and Quinn and Rebecca collapsed into their own bed exhausted, they would look at each other and laugh at the beautiful chaos their life had become. "You ever regret it?" Rebecca asked one night when Matthew was colicky and crying despite their best efforts, and the twins were getting into everything, and James had come home covered in mud from playing by the creek, and Lucy had announced she wanted a pony for her birthday. "Regret what?" Quinn asked, bouncing Matthew on his shoulder. "All of this. Taking on a widow with a baby, ending up with 5 children and a farm to run and never a moment's peace." Quinn stopped his bouncing and looked at her seriously. "Rebecca Prescott, I have never regretted a single moment since the day I walked into your house during that dust storm. Not one. You and these children are the best thing that ever happened to me. This life we have built together is more than I ever dreamed of having. So no, I do not regret any of it. I am grateful for every single chaotic, exhausting, wonderful moment." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes, even after all these years, still moved by his words. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Quinn said, finally getting a burp out of Matthew, who promptly fell asleep on his shoulder. "Now let us get this little man to bed before he wakes up again." The children grew, as children do. James showed an aptitude for working with horses, and by the time he was 15, he was training horses for other farmers in the area, earning money to save for his own place someday. Lucy was the scholar of the family, always with her nose in a book, and Rebecca and Quinn scrimped and saved to make sure she could continue her education beyond the small schoolhouse in Nevada. Matthew was the adventurer, always climbing trees and exploring the creek, and coming home with scraped knees and wild stories. Emma and Catherine were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and conspiring together in the way only twins could. Through it all, Quinn and Rebecca remained each other's anchor and haven. They still made time to sit on the porch together in the evenings after the children were in bed, holding hands and talking about their day. They still looked at each other across crowded rooms and smiled secret smiles that spoke of inside jokes and shared history. They still kissed goodbye in the mornings and hello in the evenings like they had not seen each other in years rather than hours. The farm prospered under their care. They added a barn and a proper chicken house and fenced pastures for the livestock. Quinn became known throughout the county as an honest man and a skilled farmer, and Rebecca earned a reputation for her preserves and baked goods, which she sold in town to bring in extra money. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and secure and happier than either had thought possible. On a warm August evening in 1895, 13 years to the day after the dust storm that had brought them together, Quinn and Rebecca stood together on their front porch watching the sunset. The children were all occupied with various activities, James working with a young mare in the corral, Lucy reading to the younger children under the big oak tree in the yard. 13 years, Rebecca said softly, leaning against Quinn's side. Can you believe it has been 13 years since that day? Best day of my life, Quinn said, wrapping his arm around her waist. Even though at the time I was terrified out of my mind. Rebecca laughed. You did not show it. You were so calm, so steady. I do not know what I would have done without you that day, Quinn. You would have been fine, Quinn said. You are the strongest person I know, Rebecca, but I am grateful every day that I was there, that I got to be part of bringing James into the world, that you gave me a chance even though you barely knew me. I knew enough, Rebecca said, turning to face him. I knew you were kind and brave and true, and I was right. You have been all of those things and more every single day since. You are the best husband and father I could have ever asked for, Quinn Prescott. Quinn cupped her face in his hands and kissed her tenderly. And you are the love of my life, Rebecca Prescott. Thank you for saying yes to me all those years ago. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for delivering my baby by lantern light in a dust storm, Rebecca said with a smile, and for staying afterward. They stood together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and deep purple. In the yard, their children laughed and played, healthy and happy and loved. The farm stretched out around them, the fruits of years of hard work and dedication. And inside the house, the lanterns they had lit that fateful night 13 years ago still sat on the bedroom dresser, polished and kept in perfect working order, a reminder of where their love story had begun. The years continued to roll past, bringing with them the expected joys and challenges of a full life. There were hard winters and failed crops, illnesses and injuries, disagreements and frustrations. But through it all, Quinn and Rebecca faced everything together, their love deepening and maturing with each passing year. James married at 22, a sweet girl named Anna from a neighboring farm, and they settled on a piece of land adjacent to Quinn and Rebecca's property. Within a year, they had given Quinn and Rebecca their first grandchild, a boy they named Thomas, after James's biological father. Rebecca wept when James told her the name, touched that her son wanted to honor the man who had given him life, and Quinn stood beside her with his arm around her shoulders, proud of the man their son had become. Lucy went off to normal school in Kansas City to become a teacher, making her the first in the family to receive formal education beyond basic schooling. She wrote home faithfully every week, her letters full of her studies and her dreams for the future. When she graduated at 20, the whole family traveled to Kansas City for the ceremony, Quinn and Rebecca bursting with pride as their daughter accepted her teaching certificate. Matthew joined the railroad at 18, working as part of the crew laying new track across the expanding West. He was gone for months at a time, but when he came home, he brought stories of adventure and places so far away they seemed like dreams. He eventually married a girl he met in Colorado and settled there, though he always made sure to visit Missouri at least once a year with his growing family. Emma and Catherine remained close as they grew into young women, and to no one's surprise, they married brothers, twin boys from a farm 10 miles south of Nevada. The double wedding was the social event of the year, with the whole town invited to celebrate. Emma and her husband stayed in the area, but Catherine and her husband moved to Texas to start a ranch, following the promise of cheaper land and new opportunities. As their children grew and left and started families of their own, Quinn and Rebecca found themselves entering a new phase of life. The farmhouse was quiet again, just the two of them and the rhythms of the seasons. But it was a good kind of quiet, peaceful and contented. They were both in their 50s now, their hair touched with gray and their bodies marked by decades of hard work. But they were healthy and happy and still deeply in love. They scaled back the farming operation, hiring a young family to help work the land in exchange for a share of the profits and a place to live in the small house Quinn and James built on the back 40. This gave Quinn and Rebecca more time to visit their children and growing number of grandchildren, and to simply enjoy each other's company. On the 20th anniversary of that dust storm, Quinn surprised Rebecca by taking her on a trip to St. Louis. It was her first time back since she had left after Thomas's death, and she was nervous about returning. But Quinn held her hand on the train ride and walked beside her through the streets of her old neighborhood, and she found that, while the city held memories, it no longer held pain. That part of her life was complete, laid to rest with love and respect, but no longer defining who she was. "I was so lost when I left here," Rebecca said as they stood outside the boarding house where she had lived those last few months before coming to Nevada. "I felt like my life was over, like I had nothing left to live for except the baby I was carrying. I could not imagine ever being happy again." "And now," Quinn asked gently, "now I know that life is long and full of unexpected turns," Rebecca said, smiling up at him. "I love Thomas. He was my first love, and his death devastated me. But you, Quinn, you are the love of my life. You showed me that it is possible to heal, to love again, to build something beautiful out of ashes. You gave me a family and a home and a reason to wake up smiling every morning." "You gave me everything," Quinn said, pulling her close. "Before you, I was just going through the motions, doing what was expected, not really living. You taught me what it means to truly love someone, to be part of something bigger than myself. You and our children are my whole world, Rebecca." They kissed there on the St. Louis street, two middle-aged people still as in love as the young couple who had married 20 years before. Passers-by smiled at them, touched by the obvious affection between them. That night in their hotel room, they made love with the ease and familiarity of 2 decades together. And afterward, Rebecca lay in Quinn's arms and thought about how lucky she was. She had survived loss and grief, had brought a child into the world in the middle of a dust storm, had taken a chance on love when her heart was still bruised and tender, and it had all been worth it. Every moment, every struggle, every leap of faith had led her here, to this man, to this life, to this deep and abiding happiness. The years rolled on. Grandchildren became teenagers and then adults, having children of their own. Quinn and Rebecca's hair turned from gray to white, and their steps became slower, but their love never wavered. They celebrated their 25th anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the farmhouse packed to bursting with 3 generations of the family they had created. James stood up at the party to give a speech, his voice thick with emotion. "25 years ago," he began, "my mother gave birth to me in the middle of a dust storm with only a stranger to help her. That stranger was Quinn Prescott, and what he did that night changed all of our lives. He did not just deliver me. He stayed. He chose to be part of our family, to love my mother, to be my father in every way that matters. Everything good in my life, every blessing I have, can be traced back to that night and the choice this man made to stay. So I want to raise a glass to my father, Quinn Prescott, the best man I have ever known. There was not a dry eye in the house as everyone raised their glasses. Quinn, overcome with emotion, could only nod and grip Rebecca's hand tightly. She looked at him with tears streaming down her face and mouthed, "I love you," and he mouthed it back, his heart so full he thought it might burst. At 65, Rebecca's health began to decline. The doctor said her heart was wearing out, that all those years of hard work and bearing 5 children had taken their toll. There was nothing to be done except rest and take things easy. Advice Rebecca followed with poor grace, but Quinn's steadfast enforcement. He took over all the household chores, hired help for anything physical Rebecca tried to do, and made sure she spent her days in comfort. "I am not an invalid," Rebecca protested one morning when Quinn insisted on bringing her breakfast in bed. "I know that," Quinn said patiently, setting the tray across her lap. "But you are my wife, and I love you, and I am going to take care of you whether you like it or not." "I have been taking care of myself since I was 18 years old," Rebecca said, but there was no heat in it. "And now you have me to take care of you," Quinn said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Let me do this for you, Rebecca. Please." She reached up and cupped his face in her hand, looking at him with all the love of 30 years together. "What did I do to deserve you, Quinn Prescott? You let me into your life when you had every reason to shut everyone out," Quinn said simply. "You gave me a chance. That is all I ever needed." Rebecca lived another 3 years, years she and Quinn filled with quiet moments and simple joys. They spent hours on the front porch, rocking gently and watching the seasons change. They played with great-grandchildren who came to visit, delighting in the newest generation. They talked about everything and nothing, two people so comfortable with each other that silence was as meaningful as words. On a warm evening in June, as the fireflies began to rise from the grass and the last light faded from the western sky, Rebecca turned to Quinn and said, "I am tired, my love." Quinn knew immediately what she meant. He had felt it coming, had seen the way she was fading despite all his efforts to keep her comfortable. "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "I am not afraid," Rebecca said, taking his hand. "How can I be afraid when I have had such a beautiful life? When I have been loved so completely by the best man I have ever known?" "Do not leave me," Quinn whispered, knowing it was a futile request but unable to help himself. "I will never leave you," Rebecca said firmly. "I will be right here, in every sunset we watched together, in every corner of this house we built, in every one of our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. We are written into each other, Quinn. Death cannot change that." She fell asleep that night in his arms, and by morning she was gone. Quinn held her as the sun rose, tears streaming down his face, whispering his love to her one final time. The funeral was huge, with people coming from 3 counties to pay their respects to Rebecca Prescott, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. She was buried in the Nevada cemetery under an oak tree, and Quinn made sure her headstone was the finest marble he could afford, with an inscription that read, "Rebecca Brennan Prescott, 1860–1913. Beloved wife and mother." She was stronger than she knew and more loved than she could imagine. Quinn lived another 5 years, cared for by his children who took turns staying at the farmhouse to make sure he was never alone. But everyone could see that part of him had died with Rebecca. He went through the motions, smiled at the right times, played with great-great-grandchildren who came to visit. But the light had gone out of his eyes. He spent his days on the front porch in the rocking chair beside the empty one that had been Rebecca's. He talked to her sometimes, telling her about the children, about how the farm was doing, about how much he missed her. At night he slept on his side of the bed, leaving her side untouched, as if she might come back at any moment. On an August evening in 1918, exactly 36 years to the day after he had first walked into Rebecca's house during that dust storm, Quinn sat on the porch and watched the sun set. The sky was painted in shades of orange and gold, and for a moment he could almost feel Rebecca beside him, her hand in his, her head on his shoulder. "I am coming, my love," he whispered to the empty air. "Wait for me just a little longer." He went to bed that night and did not wake up. James found him the next morning, peaceful in sleep, a slight smile on his face. On the bedside table was a letter addressed to all the children, written in Quinn's careful hand. "My dear children," it read, "if you are reading this, then I have gone to be with your mother, which is exactly where I want to be. I have lived a long and blessed life, filled with more love and happiness than any man deserves. You were all the greatest joys of my life, every single one of you, and I am so proud of the people you became. But I will not lie and say I am not ready to go. I have missed your mother every moment since she left, and I am eager to be with her again. Do not mourn for me. Instead, celebrate the life we had together, the family we built, the love that sustained us through everything. Tell your children and grandchildren the story of how your mother and I met, of how I delivered her baby by lantern light in a dust storm and fell in love with her in the process. Make sure they know that real love exists, that it can survive anything, and that it is always, always worth fighting for. I love you all. Take care of each other. And remember, family is everything. Your loving father, Quinn Prescott." They buried him beside Rebecca under the oak tree, his headstone reading Quinn Prescott, 1860–1918. Devoted husband and father. He stayed when he could have left, and that made all the difference. The farmhouse remained in the family for generations, passed down through the children and grandchildren. They kept it as a place to gather, a reminder of where their family began. And on stormy nights, when dust blew across the prairie and the wind howled around the eaves, the older members of the family would gather the younger ones around and tell them the story of Quinn and Rebecca, of a cowboy who delivered a baby by lantern light and found the love of his life in the process. They told of how Rebecca was widowed and pregnant, and came to Nevada with nothing but determination and hope. They told of how Quinn heard her cry during the dust storm and ran to help without hesitation. They told of those long hours in the lantern-lit bedroom as James was born, of how two strangers became something more in the crucible of that experience. They told of the marriage that followed, of the children born, of the life built on a foundation of love and trust and commitment. And the younger generations would listen with wide eyes, absorbing the story that had become their family legend. They learned that love could be found in the most unexpected moments, that courage meant staying when it would be easier to leave, that family was built through choice as much as blood. They learned that James, their great-great-grandfather, had been delivered by the man who became his father in every way that mattered, and that this act of kindness had set in motion a chain of events that led to all of them existing. The story of Quinn and Rebecca became a touchstone for the family, a reminder of what really mattered. When marriages struggled, couples would remember the dust storm and recommit to each other. When times were hard, people would think of Rebecca giving birth alone and Quinn staying to help, and they would find strength to keep going. When someone faced a choice between the easy path and the right path, they would think of Quinn running toward the screaming instead of away, and they would choose to run toward need rather than away from it. The lanterns that had lit James's birth were kept in a place of honor in the farmhouse, cleaned and maintained through the decades. They became almost sacred objects, tangible links to that night when everything changed. When family members married, they would light those lanterns during the ceremony, a way of bringing Quinn and Rebecca's love into their own unions. When babies were born, the lanterns would be lit in honor of the first birth in the family, James arriving 3 weeks early in a storm. On the 100th anniversary of that dust storm in 1982, the family organized a huge reunion at the old farmhouse. Descendants came from all over the country, hundreds of people who could all trace their lineage back to Quinn and Rebecca. They gathered under tents in the yard where Quinn and Rebecca had once worked side by side, sharing food and stories and memories. James's great-grandson, himself named Quinn after the man who had started it all, stood up to address the crowd. "We are here today because of a dust storm," he began, and everyone laughed. "We are here because a young widow's water broke 3 weeks early, and a cowboy she barely knew heard her cry and ran to help. We are here because Quinn Prescott delivered James Brennan by lantern light and then chose to stay. He chose love. He chose family. He chose to build a life with a woman he barely knew because he recognized something precious when he saw it. And Rebecca Brennan chose to give him a chance to open her broken heart to the possibility of loving again. Those choices, made in the midst of a crisis on a dark, stormy night, led to all of us. So today, we honor Quinn and Rebecca Prescott. We remember their story. And we commit ourselves to living by the values they embodied: courage, kindness, loyalty, and above all, love. The crowd erupted in applause, and then someone started singing one of the old songs Rebecca used to sing to her children, and soon everyone was joining in. The sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in those familiar shades of orange and gold, and the descendants of Quinn and Rebecca Prescott celebrated the love story that had given them all life. In the years that followed, the farmhouse eventually had to be sold, too old and expensive to maintain as the family scattered across the country. But before it was sold, the family made sure to document everything, to take pictures and videos, to record the stories one more time. The lanterns were donated to the local historical society, where they were put on display with a plaque telling the story of Quinn and Rebecca, and the night those lanterns had lit the birth of a baby in a dust storm. And the story itself lived on, passed down through generations, adapted and retold, but always keeping its essential truth at the core. It became the story the family told when they wanted to remember who they were and where they came from. It became a reminder that love could be found in the darkest moments, that courage meant showing up even when you were terrified, that family was created through acts of care and commitment. Quinn and Rebecca's love story did not end with their deaths. It lived on in every marriage they had inspired, every child who carried their names, every moment of kindness between family members, every choice to stay instead of leave, to help instead of walk away, to love even when it was scary and uncertain. They had built something that lasted, those two people who had come together during a dust storm in 1882. They had built a family and a legacy and a love story for the ages. And though they were long gone, their presence could still be felt in the way their descendants loved each other, in the values they passed down, in the story they kept telling. Because in the end, that is what endures. Not houses or land or possessions, but love. The love between Quinn and Rebecca, tested and strengthened over 30 years together, had created something that time could not diminish or death destroy. It lived on in every person who carried their blood, in every retelling of their story, in every lantern-lit moment when someone chose love over fear. And somewhere beyond time and space, two souls who had found each other during a dust storm walked hand in hand through eternity, their love story complete and perfect and everlasting. They had lived and loved and built a family that would carry their story forward through the generations. And that, in the end, was the greatest legacy anyone could leave behind. Love that endured, family that thrived, and a story that would never be forgotten.